Good afternoon, everyone. We'd like to welcome you and thank you for joining our webinar to learn how EVerify affects your company. A quick note before we get started, please feel free to submit questions at any time during the presentation using the chat feature on your screen. We will respond immediately to any technical concerns, and any other questions you have about the presentation being presented will be answered as soon as possible after the presentation. And without further ado, here is Ashley Kaplan, our in-house senior employment law attorney. Ashley has been practicing labor and employment law for more than 18 years. Here at G-Neal, Ashley handles our legal compliance and also oversees the teams responsible for researching all the posting laws and developing post regard services to meet our customers' diverse needs. Ashley has agreed to personally follow up with a response to any posting compliance questions you submit during the presentation. And as a special offer to our attendees today, she will also be available to provide a complimentary consultation about your specific posting compliance needs. If you are interested, please indicate that in the question box and we will contact you to set it up. And now, here's our presenter, Ashley Kaplan.
Thank you, and welcome everyone. The goal of today's webinar is to share some important information about EVerify, which is a program developed by the government to help employers verify their employees' eligibility to work in the United States. The legislation is constantly evolving in this area on a federal, state, and municipal level, and more employers than ever are now required to participate in EVerify. But for most employers, it is still a choice to participate, and there are some pros and cons to be aware of if you're considering enrolling any of your locations. So we're going to go over in a little more detail what the program is. We're going to outline who is required to participate, and then we're going to cover some things to consider if you're thinking about participating voluntarily. We're also going to talk about the mandatory posting requirements that apply for all EVerify participants. And this is something we found that a lot of businesses are not aware of, so we're going to be sure to cover that. And finally, we're going to go over a solution to help you comply with these posting requirements, the EVerify posting requirements, as well as some other requirements that might apply to you based on new laws and trends affecting U.S. businesses. So let's get started and jump right in with an overview of the EVerify program and how it works. First of all, just a little more about the program itself. EVerify is a free online service, and it allows you to confirm a new employee's work authorization status to verify whether someone is legally authorized to work in the U.S. It's an internet-based system, and it's operated by the government, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, and in conjunction with the Social Security Administration. And the system allows you to confirm an employee's work eligibility at the time of hire as part of your I-9 process. So through its database, it runs a cross-check with the DHS records and also the Social Security Administration records, and it returns a result letting you know if the person is legally authorized to work in the U.S. The legislation for EVerify specifies that the goals of the program are, number one, to reduce the employment of individuals unauthorized to work. Number two, to reduce discrimination in the verification process. Three, to prevent undue burden on employers. And finally, to protect privacy and employees' civil liberties. So by the way, a lot of people don't realize that there are strict anti-discrimination provisions in the law, in the Immigration Reform and Control Act. And that law applies to all U.S. employers, but there are actually strict provisions in the law that prohibit discrimination on the basis of national origin and citizenship in the hiring process. And I know that can be confusing. The intent is to require I-9s and to confirm that your employees are eligible to work in the United States, but it also protects those same employees against discrimination. So this is the same law that requires you to complete an I-9 form for every new hire, but it also prevents you during the I-9 process from asking employees for extra documentation above and beyond what's listed on the I-9 form. That's considered a form of document abuse discrimination. And that's true even if you suspect that someone's not authorized to work in the U.S. You're restricted to just asking for the documents that are listed on the I-9 form. That law also prohibits you from asking for specific documents other than what's listed on the I-9 form. For example, you can't specify, we need a passport, or we need a social security card, or a green card. That you have to go with the documents listed on the form, or that's considered discrimination. It also prohibits you from over-scrutinizing someone's documents just because you might suspect that they're not authorized, or if they're foreign, or if they have a foreign name or an accent. You have to treat everyone the same in the I-9 process. So that means you have to complete an I-9 for everyone, even if you personally know them and they're a neighbor or a friend. I use the example, even if you were in the room when they were born in the United States, you still have to complete an I-9 for that person. And you also have to accept whatever documents an employee chooses to present to prove their identity and their work authorization, as long as those documents are listed on the form and they've given you the proper combination. And that's all in the instructions. They have to give you the proper combination to prove both identity and work eligibility. So if you go above and beyond, you can be accused of illegal discrimination. So the EVerify program, that's one of the goals. It's helps to prevent that. So you can rely on the government database to do all the work for you. The government database will verify work eligibility instead of you being in a position where you're having to act on assumptions or fears about hiring someone illegally. I just want to clarify that using EVerify or participating in the program does not excuse you in any way from any of these discrimination laws. You still have to treat all employees the same in the verification process, even when it comes to EVerify. You can't just put certain employees through the EVerify check and just rely on the paper I-9 forms for others. It's all or nothing. So that has to be, the EVerify program has to be used consistently without regard to someone's apparent work status, national origin, citizenship, or without regard to any of the information that you've collected on their I-9 form. Also, I also want to clarify that EVerify is not a substitute for the I-9 forms. It's actually to be used in conjunction with the I-9 documentation process. It does not replace it. So you still have to have every new employee complete Section 1 of the I-9 form on or before their first day of work, and you still have to review their documentation within 3 days of their start date, and you still have to certify on the Form I-9 in Section 2, you have to certify that you've reviewed the documentation in person and that the documents appear to be genuine and relate to the individual that you've hired. You actually use this information straight from the I-9 form to start an EVerify search. You have to input the information from Sections 1 and 2 directly from the form to initiate an EVerify case for a new hire. And by the way, you also have to run the EVerify check within 3 days of the employee's start date. So just like Section 2 of the I-9. So most employers work it into their I-9 process and run the EVerify check as soon as they complete Section 2 of the I-9 form, as long as it's within those first 3 days. Also, just like the I-9 form, you can't use EVerify for applicants. You have to wait until an employee has actually accepted a job offer. So technically, you could do it before the employee actually starts to work. You could do the I-9, you could do EVerify before the employee actually starts to work, but only if there's an actual job offer that's been extended and accepted. You can't use this on applicants. And remember, the requirement for the employee for Section 1 of the I-9 is also on or before that first day of work, so the same thing applies. As far as your existing employees, the only time that you can really do an EVerify check on an existing employee is if you become covered by a federal contract and it requires it, or if you're re-verifying an employee who had a temporary work authorization. Otherwise, you can't just take an employee's information and run an EVerify check on them. Some more basics about the program. Currently, there are more than 500,000 companies that are participating. And like I said, a lot of employers are required to participate, which we're going to go over in a moment. But overall, about 1/3 of all the participants are doing so voluntarily. And you might be surprised to learn how many small businesses are participating. When you include both the mandatory and the voluntary participants, of all the users, about 23% have fewer than 20 employees. And then about 35% are companies with 20 to 99 employees, and about 30% are companies with between 100 and 499 employees. So that means almost 90% of all the users are companies with fewer than 500 employees. Also, a lot of people are surprised to learn how fast the system works. On average, employers who use EVerify receive an initial response regarding the employee's work authorization within 3 to 5 seconds. So it's basically immediate. Of all the employees who are checked through the EVerify system, 98.8% of work authorized employees are automatically confirmed instantly or within 24 hours. And at that point, that would require no further action on your part or on the part of the employee. So on almost all cases, you're getting an immediate result with work authorization. When there are issues with a person's work authorization, it can take longer, obviously, and that is one of the struggles that the agency is constantly trying to improve upon, and that's something we'll get into when we start talking about the pros and cons. This slide shows you state by state whether you are required to participate in EVerify. The first line of this chart lists the states where all employers must participate, and that is regardless of your company size, your industry, or whether you do any business with the federal or state or local government, whether you have any government contracts. It's simply required for all employers in these states. And by the way, the state laws on EVerify are quickly evolving, and there are lots of other states right now with pending legislation to require EVerify as well, in addition to those that are listed here. So it's really important for you to consult with an attorney or do the research, but preferably consult with an attorney in your state if you're opting not to participate, just to make sure you're current with the laws at the time of your decision. This is current as of today, but make sure that you check that out if you're opting not to participate. Also, you'll notice here in this first line that I've included an asterisk next to a few of the states, and this is because technically employers in those states are allowed to use an alternative to EVerify. But the requirements are so similar that most employers just choose to go ahead and use the EVerify program. It's established, it works, and it just makes it easier to comply. So those are lumped in with the other mandatory EVerify states for that reason. The next line on this chart lists the states where you're required to participate if you're a public sector employer or a state contractor. And the next line lists the states where only public employers have to participate. And then finally, there are the states where you only have to participate if you're a state contractor. I've included this last line here on the chart with the states where EVerify maybe used to be required, but at this time the law has either expired or it's been rescinded. And I went ahead and included this because I still get a lot of questions about whether it's required in these states, so I know that there's some confusion. Also, if regardless of your state, you're required to participate if you're a federal government contractor, meaning you have contracts with the federal government for goods or services or receive federal funding, or if you're a subcontractor with an EVerify clause in your contract. And then finally, all federal agencies are required to participate. So before we get into the pros and cons and how to decide whether to participate voluntarily, I thought it was interesting to see what kinds of companies are choosing to voluntarily participate. So this slide shows the distribution of voluntary participants by company size and by type of industry. So in terms of company size, the majority are small and medium-sized businesses, with only about 18% of the participants being larger companies with more than 150 employees. As far as industry type, less than 2% of the voluntary participants are employment agencies. Then a little less than 25% are companies in what are known as high-risk industries, and that includes agriculture, forestry, fishing, hunting, construction, food manufacturing, services to buildings and dwellings, accommodations, food services, and drinking places. And this list comes from the government. These are considered high risk for immigration purposes because these are the industries that have been designated by the government as having the highest number of undocumented workers. So at first, this may seem sort of surprising that such a small percentage of the high-risk companies are voluntarily participating. You might think that these companies would be the most concerned about immigration violations and compliance and the most eager to enroll in this kind of a program. But really the reality is that there are a lot of businesses in these industries that still depend on undocumented workers to stay competitive and profitable. And surveys have shown that a lot of these companies are afraid to participate because they fear losing a significant portion of their work pool. If they were to run an EVerify check to confirm the validity of their documentation, that would reduce their work pool and the availability of employees. So, and then of course there's also the fear that the EVerify results might expose patterns that would put them at risk of an audit or an enforcement action. As I've mentioned, about 1/3 of all the participants who are using EVerify have chosen to do so voluntarily. So as with any decision, there are pros and cons to consider if this is something you're thinking about doing voluntarily. So one reason that companies choose to participate is to achieve consistency across the business. So let's say you have multiple locations and some of your locations are required to participate based on the laws of your state, or maybe some of them are involved in federal government contract work. So a lot of companies in that scenario, if you have multiple locations and some of them are required to participate and others are not, a lot of companies just go ahead and adopt the EVerify system for all the locations across the board just for consistency. It's easier to have one system in place. You've already set up the technology, you've already done the training, so why not make it consistent company-wide? Also, along the same lines, federal and state government contracts can come and go, and in some cases it's hard to determine whether any government contract work is actually being performed at a given location. The requirement applies for the locations where the government work is being performed when it comes to these federal contracts. So this approach, going across the board, makes it easy to manage that instead of trying to worry about which locations are required to participate at a given time and which ones aren't, which contracts are active or applicable and which ones aren't covered by those contracts. Another reason why a lot of employers report voluntary participation is to get ahead of the law. As I've just mentioned, these laws are constantly evolving, and it can be a burden to keep track of, especially if you have locations in multiple states. So a lot of employers are participating just to be safe and not have to worry about monitoring their state laws or having to rush to comply once a state law is passed requiring it. So they're just trying to get ahead of the curve. There are also a lot of employers who feel that it's inevitable that this is eventually going to become a national requirement for all businesses. So why not get on board early, get comfortable with it and avoid the rush if and when all U.S. employers have to convert and start using it. So probably the most common reason I hear from clients who choose to participate is peace of mind. Employers a lot of times feel helpless and worried, sort of like an open target, when they consider the possibility that they may have unauthorized workers on staff. Whether they had good intentions or not, it's still something people are worried about. And that's because if you're just using the traditional I-9 form, it really leaves a lot of room for error, a lot of unknowns, because it's really just based on your own review of the employee's documents and whether they appear to be valid on their face. And there aren't a lot of experts in this area, so there's really not an easy way to tell if you're looking at fraudulent documents. Or even if someone's using another person's identity or information. That's can be really difficult, especially because you could be looking at documents from a number of different countries and might not be familiar with what it's supposed to look like. Also, because of the anti-discrimination provisions that we talked about, even if you do suspect that someone is not authorized to work and you're in the I-9 process, there's not really a lot more that you can do other than just the regular I-9 document review. As we said, you can't dig any deeper. You can't request additional documentation or a particular kind of document to establish someone's eligibility. You're just stuck with that list on the I-9 form. So a lot of companies feel that using EVerify for new hires is really the only way to get peace of mind by confirming, having a way to actually confirm that the data provided by the employee actually matches up with the data that the government has on file. Of course, even using EVerify, there is still room for error, and some unauthorized workers will still pass through the EVerify check because maybe they're using someone else's valid information. It might not be their actual identity. The person whose information they're using is legally eligible or authorized to work in the U.S. But by participating, it's obviously going to really minimize that risk, much more so than the traditional paper I-9s. I also want to caution you here that EVerify participation is not a safe harbor that automatically protects you from a government audit or from immigration penalties. It's just one step that you can take to reduce the likelihood of employing undocumented workers in the first place and being subject to all the sanctions associated with knowingly hiring or hiring an undocumented worker and the other immigration violations that come with that. This next reason is really more, I think, for larger companies and employment agencies that do a lot of hiring, and that is the benefit of improved compliance with I-9 requirements. One of the benefits of using EVerify is that it can actually help you become aware of systematic errors or patterns that you might have been making with your I-9s. For example, if you're not recording all of the information from the documentation you're reviewing, or you're not using the proper combination of documents to establish identity and eligibility, or even if you're not paying attention to expiration dates on certain kinds of documents, documents you're not used to seeing. So once you have to rely on that information to run an EVerify check, you have to input that information in order to kick off the EVerify case. These errors on your I-9 start to surface, and you can start to take corrective action to edit the forms and eliminate these errors going forward. And this is just a way to improve your overall level of compliance with I-9 paperwork. And by the way, that's important because you can be fined just for little mistakes on your I-9 forms. Even if the person you've hired turns out to be legally authorized to work in the United States, you can actually be fined up to $1,100 per violation just for missing information on the I-9 paperwork, regardless of the employee's work authorization status. Another benefit is that once you start using EVerify, this should reduce or even eliminate the problem of receiving Social Security number no match letters from the Social Security Administration. That's when you're withholding taxes for your employee, and these no match letters are sent to you when the Social Security number listed on an employee's W-2 doesn't match the Social Security Administration records. And these are, unfortunately, they're pretty common. But if you're using EVerify, since EVerify checks the Social Security Administration's database and confirms that there is a match up front, you're less likely to get these letters down the road. The next one is a significant benefit. Employers who use EVerify benefit from what the law calls a rebuttable presumption that they did not knowingly hire an unauthorized worker. So like I said before, this does not amount to a safe harbor protection, and it doesn't exempt you from any fines if it turns out that you did hire unauthorized workers, but it may help in the event that an employee is determined to lack work authorization. So if you ran that employee's data through EVerify and you were told that he or she was authorized to work, as long as there's no other information that came to light that should have caused you to question it, or called the person's status into question. As long as you've gotten that result, then you cannot be charged with what's called a knowing hire violation. And knowingly hiring an undocumented worker, those are the kinds of violations that lead to the stiffest penalties, the highest penalties, even criminal sanctions. So it's really helpful to be able to rely on the system to avoid that. This next one actually comes from personal experience helping clients in immigration audits. When you're audited and you have to produce all of your I-9 records, the ICE agent will ask you whether you use EVerify. And if you're using EVerify voluntarily, you're likely to get brownie points for using it, and you may be less likely to be fined for any little errors that are found in your I-9 forms. So and again, I'm talking about mistakes in your paperwork, like missing information on the forms. I'm not talking about being excused for hiring an undocumented worker. Now let's talk about some of the negatives or the reasons why a lot of companies choose not to participate. First of all, EVerify is free, but when you consider the resources it takes to implement, some employers feel that it's just too burdensome to take on. And this, I think, really depends on your company's resources, whether you already have all the equipment and technology to easily adapt to an internet-based tool in your hiring process. And it also depends, I think, on the level of sophistication or the comfort level with technology of the people that who you have on staff who are going to be the ones running these EVerify checks. In recent user surveys, employers indicated that they did have to allot some time toward training the employees who would administer the system, and that could include attending tutorials, and then there's the time it takes to run the queries themselves, to actually do the EVerify checks, and then the time and resources involved when you get a tentative non-confirmation. When you do your initial EVerify check, you could receive tentative non-confirmation or a TNC. This is an initial report you get showing non-confirmation of a worker's eligibility for employment. And because of all the rules surrounding these TNCs and what you have to do with them, and also the amount of time it can take to resolve someone's work eligibility status once you've gotten a TNC, you could potentially invest weeks into training and onboarding a new employee only to have to terminate that person once EVerify issues a final non-confirmation. So, and everyone knows the costs associated with employee turnover, having to recruit, hire, train another person. It can really affect productivity and ultimately your bottom line. By the way, in a recent user survey, 20% of the respondents said that training was the biggest cost, but it's also good to know that 97% reported that the system was user-friendly. So again, consider your resources and the level of the comfort level in terms of technology of the person or the people who you're going to be training to run these EVerify checks. The next one is still a problem that employers report in satisfaction surveys, but it's actually getting a lot better, and that is the risk of error. The EVerify system does still have its flaws. So if you use it, you're probably going to have to deal with getting some TNCs, even for employees who end up being cleared on their work authorization. And like I said, this can be time consuming, it can be disruptive. There also are cases where you can get final non-confirmations for individuals who end up, who are in fact authorized to work. And that can also be difficult to deal with. But like I said, the system is getting more and more accurate, but these are still concerns that employers are reporting, so it's something to consider and be aware of. This next one is also a resource issue in terms of your time and internet availability. So in order to use EVerify, you have to be able to complete your I-9 forms on time and have access to the internet to run the EVerify check within 3 days of the employee's start date. And this might sound easy and simple, but it can really come down to crunch time, considering that during this same window of time, you have to complete the I-9 process. You have to gather, review, and record all the details about the employee's documentation. So especially if you're hiring more than one person at a time, and that just multiplies. So inevitably, a lot of employers end up missing the 3-day deadline to complete the EVerify check online. And unlike with the paper I-9 forms, there's a record of exactly when the EVerify check was completed. That's part of the, goes into the government records. It's, part of the online process captures obviously the date and time when these checks are run, and in comparison to the employee's start date. So the problem with this is that these late queries, these late EVerify checks, could lead the government to believe that you're not completing your I-9s on time either, that you're not meeting that 3-day window, and that can make you a potential target for an I-9 inspection. So there's actually been a lot of businesses who have reported a correlation, and they feel that these late EVerify submissions are what triggered an ICE investigation, that these late submissions exposed them to an ICE investigation that they could have otherwise avoided. So, you don't always know if you get audited. You don't always know what triggered it. It could have been a disgruntled employee. It could have been anyone reporting potential violation, or like in this case, it could have been something with your EVerify checks. On a related note, the government does track the information that employers submit via the EVerify system. So, when you're using EVerify, you're effectively providing all your I-9 data to the government that the government wouldn't otherwise have access to unless it audited your I-9 paper records in person. So this allows the government to see information from lots of employers and to compare it. So it's actually useful in terms of the purpose of the program, because let's say you have 10 different people who are using the same Social Security number and they're working for 10 different employers. The government can data mine all that information, and they can notice that trend and then investigate. So in this kind of scenario, that you've got one employee who's using the same, you've got one identity that's being used by multiple employees. While you're probably not going to face any consequences relating to that particular individual, you still might find yourself tied up in an investigation or in an audit, and that can be time-consuming and stressful, even if it doesn't end up turning up any violations. And by the way, I wanted to mention, even the most sophisticated employers are prone to getting fines for violations on their I-9 paperwork. Like I said, it's usually not something anyone intends or is even aware of, but it's estimated that at least half of all I-9 forms completed by U.S. businesses have mistakes that could lead to fines. And that number comes from the government. In my personal experience working with employers and doing internal audits of their I-9 forms, I would say it is a lot higher. It's a lot higher than 50%. This chart shows the results from a recent user survey. This was from the last national survey conducted on all EVerify participants. And it shows all of the different reasons that businesses cited for participating in the program. And by the way, this chart captures responses for all EVerify users, whether it's voluntary or not. So you're going to see on here that some were required to participate. But the respondents were asked to select all of the applicable reasons that motivated their decision. So it's not just about meeting the law's requirements. The majority of employers reported multiple reasons for participating, but you can see here that the main reason cited is to improve the ability to verify work authorization. And that really goes to the peace of mind compliance that we just talked about. Also, 26.2% of the participants said that they enrolled because they thought it would allow them to avoid a government audit, raid, or fine. 23.5% enrolled because of a client request. And other than mandatory participation, the other two most popular reasons were because it was recommended by a trusted colleague or because of the belief that it would make the company more competitive in their industry. And that's because of the belief that certain customers and vendors prefer to do business with EVerify participants, or in some cases they have to because of contract requirements. Actually, EVerify has a feature. It's an employer search tool that businesses can use, anyone can use, to see if their vendors are using EVerify, to see if they are participants. And this can be used to choose other businesses to work with. It can be used to determine if you're allowed to contract with another company, so that all of that information is visible. I think the most compelling information about the program's pros and cons comes straight from the users, the people who have actually been using the program. So I wanted to share just a few more highlights that were gathered from this latest version of the user survey. First of all, just to help put it all in perspective, for overall satisfaction with the program, users gave EVerify a score of 86 out of 100. And the average score for all government agencies, for all federal agencies, was a 67. So that's considered pretty high. Also, EVerify got the highest satisfaction rating for customer service out of all the federal government agencies. In the business impact section of the survey, employers reported that the EVerify program contributed to a reduction in unauthorized employment. Of course, that's the goal. But in fact, there were 19% of the respondents of the EVerify users agreed that the number of unauthorized workers who applied for jobs decreased because EVerify was used. So that's a deterrent in and of itself. Also, among the companies that had ever received a TNC, a tentative non-confirmation for an employee, 64% agreed that some workers decided to quit rather than to contest their TNC findings. And then a fourth of the employers agreed that some of their workers decided to quit before they were even informed about the TNC, before they even got the results of the EVerify check, just knowing that their information was going to be run through the system. So the assumption here is that a lot of these workers chose to leave because they were not eligible to work in the United States. So that goes to the effectiveness of the program in terms of saving you time and money dealing with tentative non-confirmations, trying to resolve discrepancies, and then ultimately reducing the number of unauthorized workers on your staff that could potentially expose you to penalties for immigration violations. So the majority of participants basically are saying it works, and it is saving them the burden and the worry and the fear of having to deal with exposure to these violations. Also, while most of the users reported positive experiences, there are still a lot of negatives that have been reported. For example, about 14% of the users agreed that it was difficult or even impossible to consistently submit the case information within the deadlines, that they're having problems getting it done on time. And then some of the users, and it ranged on each of these categories from about 2 to 6%, reported that EVerify has made it difficult to attract qualified and work authorized job applicants. They've also reported that it's caused them to lose valuable employees. And also some reported that it's reduced the employer's overall competitiveness in their industry. The USCIS is constantly trying to improve the EVerify program, especially like we talked about, when it comes to the accuracy and the ease of use, to try to reduce the number of non-confirmations that come back and then end up being confirmed. So this slide just shows some of the other recent developments that the agency has published, some things that have, upgrades that have come out recently over the past year or two. And there are a lot more, but I'm just highlighting some of the major ones here, some of the ones that I think are the most relevant. So first of all, they have enhanced the user tutorial. And this is really to make sure that all the users are up to date on the EVerify training, and it was done in March 2015. So the tutorial is mandatory. So the system can see that if you haven't logged on, if any user's last log on was prior to December 6, 2010, it forces you to go ahead and take this tutorial, and it lasts about 45 minutes. And you have to do that before you're allowed to run a new EVerify check or even to access your existing case data. So it's a mandatory tutorial. Also in March 2015, the system was enhanced with a new feature that should save all your data if you experience a system interruption. So before you would have to start all over whenever there was an interruption and the system was restored, and now that's saved. That was another enhancement. And then finally, they've launched a website specifically for employees to check their own eligibility status, and it's called My EVerify. And it's been around for a while, but it's kind of been revamped recently. And this is like a self-check tool that allows users to confirm their own employment eligibility. It also allows a person to essentially lock their Social Security number in the EVerify system, and that's to prevent fraudulent use in the system by other people. A person can go in and lock your Social Security number to prevent other people from duplicating it or using it fraudulently. But the main purpose of this tool is to let job seekers, applicants, make sure that their records are accurate before an employer checks their employment eligibility. Also to deter document and identity fraud. But that can be really helpful, if an employee can check out their own information and resolve any discrepancies or issues with their documentation before they apply, and then before you spend the time going through that process on their behalf. So one of the things that's often overlooked with the EVerify program is the mandatory posting requirement that comes along with it. There are actually strict posting requirements. The mandatory postings that you have to display at all your locations that are participating. And these posting requirements apply to all EVerify participants, whether you're participating because you have to or because you've chosen to voluntarily. And I know that part seems counterintuitive, but the posting requirement is mandatory even if your participation in the program is voluntary. So what are the posting requirements for EVerify? There are actually two posters that are required, the EVerify participation poster and the right to work poster, which a lot of people also refer to as the EVerify discrimination poster. Both of the posters have to be posted in English and Spanish, and that's true even if you have no Spanish-speaking employees. They have to be displayed in both languages no matter where you're located and regardless of whether you have any Spanish-speaking employees or applicants. Also, the posters have to be displayed where applicants and employees can see them. So most companies comply by posting these near an entrance, so that way they cover the applicant posting aspect of the law. By the way, the agency now is issuing this poster in multiple languages. I think it's up to 17 different languages now. But again, the only languages that you're required to post in, for now anyway, are English and Spanish. Before I get into our EVerify posting solutions, I realize that some of you might not be familiar with PostRegard compliance protection, so I want to back up just a little bit and give a high-level overview of PostRegard and how it works, and then I'll move into the EVerify posting solutions. PostRegard is a comprehensive labor law posting solution by GNeil, and GNeil is the industry leader in posting compliance for more than 25 years. And the way that the program works is we start you out by sending all of the mandatory federal and state labor law postings to each of your locations. And depending on your state, just to comply with federal and state posting laws, you're required to post anywhere from 9 to 21 postings at each location. And that number keeps growing, but depending on the state. But in some cases, that you also have to post at multiple areas within your business just to make sure that the postings are readily accessible to everyone in the business. So depending on the logistics and the layout, you might have to have more than one posting display location in each facility. Also, by the way, there are additional labor law postings required if you're in certain industries like healthcare or food services. There are additional postings if you have federal contracts, and also additional postings if you're located in certain counties and cities. Our posters are combined and printed on a condensed laminated format, and this is to save wall space, but also to ensure durability and to protect the posters from being ripped or torn or covered up, and that's to ensure compliance. To help save on wall space, I did want to mention that we do make the posters as small as legally possible, but we will never compromise on compliance. So all of our posters are attorney reviewed to ensure that they adhere to the government's strict requirements when it comes to size, font, layout, and color. Once you get your initial postings, we pretty much take care of everything from there. Our in-house legal team is constantly monitoring the poster changes, so we're reviewing the changes on a daily basis. And then whenever there's a mandatory update, we immediately notify you about the change and what the change is, and we automatically send you the new posters at no additional charge. And that is, no matter how many changes there are throughout the year. And by the way, these posters change frequently. We see about 150 changes a year, and half of those require immediate mandatory replacements. Just in a single state, in one state alone, since I've been working in posting compliance, I've seen up to 14 mandatory changes in a single year. That's the most I've ever seen. But it really just depends on the state, and sometimes you'll only see a couple of changes a year. Other times a state will have 5 or 6 or even more, like I said. But as a PostRegard customer, you don't have to worry about keeping track of the changes or replacing your posters. That's all done for you. That's part of the program. PostRegard also provides a 100% guarantee against government posting fines. And this means that if you're a PostRegard customer and you receive a government posting fine when you've properly displayed the most recent version of the posters that we sent you, we take full responsibility for the fine, and there's no limit or cap to that. I also wanted to mention, in addition to the basic federal and state poster coverage, we do have PostRegard solutions for cities and counties. We have full coverage for Canada. We cover mandatory applicant area posting requirements. We cover the industry-specific postings that I mentioned. And all of our solutions are available in the traditional wall postings, but also in alternate formats, including binder formats for workspaces that don't have walls, or small workspaces without walls, and also electronic solutions. We have all of the different solutions available electronically with full tracking, and that's to help you meet your posting obligations for your remote workers or your telecommuters with internet access. So if you want any information about any of these expanded services that I've just mentioned, just put a note or indicate that in the chat feature, and we'll be sure to follow up with you directly, and we can answer any questions you might have. But when it comes to the EVerify postings, PostRegard also has you covered. As a PostRegard member, your basic federal and state service already includes the EVerify posters in all of the states where EVerify is mandatory. So this means that we automatically include the EVerify postings for all of your locations in those 9 states where all employers have to participate in EVerify. And this is automatic and at no additional charge. The same thing goes for our public sector customers. If you operate in any of those states where government employers have to participate, you're also automatically covered if you have PostRegard for public sector. And that's just a version of PostRegard that is specifically for government employers, because as a government employer, you have all sorts of unique posting requirements that vary from state to state. In fact, if you're a public sector employer, you even have different federal postings to display. So we've developed a special version of PostRegard to help you comply. Finally, if you're a federal contractor and you have our PostRegard for federal contractors, which is another service that I'm going to talk about quickly in a moment, this poster is already included in your service because it's required for you. So if it's something that's required because of your state or because you're a federal contractor and you have federal contractor service, it's automatically included. It's a mandatory posting for you. A little bit about the poster itself. Ours is a combination poster, so it contains both of the required postings, and it has them in English and Spanish, since, like I said, it's mandatory to post both posters in both languages. One of the things that is unique about PostRegard is that we always include foreign language postings at no additional charge if they're required for everyone. So this EVerify posting is just one example, but there are actually 22 states that require certain postings to be posted in Spanish even if you have no Spanish-speaking employees. So that's something that a lot of people aren't aware of. But as a PostRegard customer, we don't think you should have to ask for these. We don't think you should even have to research to know about them, and certainly not have to pay extra for them. So since they're mandatory for everyone, we include them automatically to make sure you're in 100% compliance. So a lot of people ask for more information on these specific posters I'm talking about, or the 22 states. So if that's something you're interested in getting, again, just put a note in the chat box and we'll follow up with you and give you that information. I think there are a total of 46 or maybe 47 now different posters in those 22 states that this applies to. But remember, if you're already a PostRegard member, there's nothing to worry about with these because these posters are already included on your English posters as part of your basic federal and state coverage. There's nothing that you need to do. You'll also notice with this EVerify posting that we print it on a smaller separate sheet apart from your large all-in-one posters. And this is to make it easier for you to comply with that requirement that it has to be viewed by applicants. So it makes it easy for you to post it at an entrance. This is also something that we do as a courtesy whenever there's a mandatory posting that has to be posted near an entrance. And there are some other examples of these. One good example is with no smoking posters. There are actually 23 states right now where employers are required to post no smoking posters, and some have really strict content requirements and layout requirements. They're state-specific posters. And we go ahead and include these also with our basic federal and state coverage, and we print them as smaller separate posters as a courtesy, so you can easily hang them near entrances as required by law. So you're not forced to hang the huge all-in-ones at your entrances and in your break rooms and everywhere else. You can take the no smoking pieces on its own and put it near an entrance. For the EVerify Right to Work poster, just a side note, there have been a lot of mandatory changes to this poster since it came out. I think there have been 4 mandatory changes since the poster came out in 2009. So you do want to make sure that all of your locations have the latest version displayed. If you're a Coast Guard customer, your locations in all of the covered states would have already received all of the updates as they were released, so there's nothing to be concerned about. But if you have locations that are participating in EVerify voluntarily, outside of those states where it's mandatory, you would need to let us know so that we can add the EVerify postings onto your service for those locations too. So don't forget about the locations that are participating voluntarily. I mentioned that we have another add-on service specifically for federal contractors, so I just wanted to include a final slide about these postings because this is an area that I still get a lot of questions on, and a lot of you on today's webinar are probably covered by these requirements if you're covered by EVerify laws, so I wanted to be sure to include it. Federal contractors have additional posting requirements above and beyond the federal and state postings that every other business has to display. There are actually up to 10 additional postings that apply to employers who are federal contractors, and that's either because you're receiving federal funding or you're doing business with the federal government in terms of sales of goods or services, excuse me. Actually, in recent years, we've really seen the number of businesses grow that are covered by these federal contractor requirements, and that's just because of developments in the economy and new government funding initiatives that really apply to more types of businesses, just a broader range of industries. It used to be something that we would talk about really mostly for construction or defense contractors, but in recent years, we've seen this expand to finance and banking, telecommunications, technology, educational institutions, healthcare even, transportation, and then a lot of nonprofit organizations as well. Just the number of federal contractors just continues to grow. So in most cases, your specific posting obligations will depend on what contract you have and with what government agency, and in some cases also the amount of your contract. And we've found, like I said earlier, that a lot of businesses with government contracts didn't even know that they were required to post these additional notices. It's not something that you're going to get. You're not going to get that information directly from the contracting agency, and a lot of times it's buried in the contract and may get overlooked. So this slide lists the most common postings that are required for federal contractors. We're not going to go into detail on the specifics for each poster, but we do have a great white paper on each posting requirement to help you determine what applies to you. So if you'd like that information, just send us an email or indicate that in the chat box, and we'll be happy to send it to you after the presentation. I did want to just say a quick word about the NLRA poster because that's something I still get a lot of questions about, and I know there's still some confusion around this one. For the NLRA poster, a lot of you probably heard over the past few years that there was a lot of buzz around this posting requirement, and that was when it was part of a rule issued by the NLRB requiring all employers to post this notice advising employees of their right to form a union. And at the time, this went through a lot of litigation. There was a lot of debate around it. And then finally, in the summer of 2013, there were a series of court cases that struck down this posting requirement and invalidated it. But the important part is that this requirement that was struck down was the one that was going to be for all employers. There is still a requirement, and it's completely separate. It's part of Executive Order 13496. And this separate requirement applies to federal contractors, and it requires federal contractors to post this NLRA poster. So federal contractors are not off the hook when it comes to this posting requirement. Also, I wanted to mention that these federal contractor posters change frequently. They change at a much faster rate than the regular federal posters, and that's because there are a lot of new posters that are issued as new executive orders come out, and also poster updates as the laws are expanded or revised. There have actually been 12 mandatory federal contractor updates, and that includes new or revised mandatory postings since 2009. And we're expecting a few more by the end of this calendar year based on regulations that have already taken effect. So executive orders that are already in effect where the poster change hasn't been made yet. So the agencies just need to catch up with the law and issue the new posters. So that's something that we're watching really closely. Also, the penalties for noncompliance with these federal contractor posters can be even worse than for the regular federal and state posters. If an employer doesn't comply with the federal contractor posting requirements, there are not only steep fines, but you can also lose your government contract or funding. And that's something that's typically written right into the contract, that it can be suspended or canceled just because of noncompliance with the posting requirements. So based on customer demand, we've created an all-in-one solution for these federal contractor postings. And that's really because it's so hard to keep up with all the individual specific requirements and how they correspond to your active contracts, especially because these contracts typically come and go, and usually the person in your business who is responsible for posting compliance is not the same person who manages these government contracts. So it's hard to know at any given time which contracts are active and whether they meet the threshold amount to trigger a specific posting requirement. And then on top of that, it's difficult just to know what posters are required in the first place, which posters correspond with your contracts, and then to stay on top of all the new postings and the changes as they come out. So we listened to our customers on this issue, and we developed an all-in-one solution to make it as easy as possible. This is a full-service solution. It works just like the basic Poster Guard compliance protection, where all of the poster updates and replacements and the new posters are covered automatically. And it's also backed by our 100% compliance guarantee against posting fines. By the way, we do still offer each of these posters individually as well. So if you know that you only need a certain ones and you don't want coverage for the new posters as they come out. But we have found that most of our customers who are required to post more than one or two of these have decided to go ahead and go with the all-inclusive solution as just sort of a safety net for peace of mind compliance. Like I said, then you don't have to keep up with new laws and new posters as they come out. Well, that wraps it up. I hope you found this presentation to be helpful and informative, and hopefully you're walking away with some action items to help make sure you're in total compliance when it comes to these issues and the posting requirements that apply to your business. If you have any questions or you would like additional information about Poster Guard or any of the compliance issues that I've talked about today, please feel free to contact our compliance specialist, Sarah Santiago, at 954-970-5533, or you can reach Sarah by email at ssantiago@posterguard.com. Thanks again for attending today's presentation, and we hope you have a wonderful afternoon.